Hey, Teacher Thoughts here coming at you with another video. So today we're going to talk a little bit about garden planting and microclimates. Now, microclimates are kind of exactly what you think about. They are climate regions within your garden which are really, really small, and they really depend on terrain and location. So when we understand microclimates, it can help us a lot when we start to plan out our coming season's plants for the year. So what are you going to plant and where are you going to plant them? So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the microclimate that revolves around where cold stays in the winter. So right here we have a prime example of this. So it's a little afternoon near the end of January in my yard, and as you can see up next to where this fence is, where it's shadowed, we have a lot of frost that's on the ground, and this frost is staying all day long. In fact, it's been here for a couple of weeks. So with this, we know that in the shadow of this fence in my section of this yard right here, we know that we're going to have areas that are going to get cold and they're going to stay cold. Now, for some plants, that's not a problem. Your woody ornamentals, some of your shrubs, those that have a different hardiness zone, they're going to be okay. But for some of our herbaceous plants, we might actually run into problems in our flower beds if we have areas that stay cold for long periods of time. And one of those things is that plants do actually still lose moisture in the winter. And if you think about the fact that frozen water cannot move, then it also means that it can't move in the soil to our plants. And some of our plants can actually dry out and die of drought in the middle of winter because it is so cold and that moisture is not available to them. So if you want a prime example, we'll go over to one of our garden beds here. Let me shadow you there. So we'll go over to one of our garden beds and we'll talk a little bit about that and how you'll kind of see that effect in your garden. So this is one of my vegetable beds here, and in it we have some Swiss chard. So this Swiss chard, in the mornings, it's generally kind of wilted. So the plant lowers the moisture content in the leaves. Things will kind of wilt down so that it's not losing too much moisture. But if we look at this bed itself, the soil, all of this soil is pretty dry. So it's had a chance to thaw out for the morning, but it's pretty dry. So what we really need to do is we're actually going to have to do some supplementary watering here to keep these plants alive, because we're not getting moisture from the sky. We're not getting any precipitation right now in North Idaho. Normally we would have snow this time of year and we might have rain, but usually we have some sort of frozen precipitation. And unfortunately, those of you down in North Florida, y'all got our snow. So we don't actually have it here in North Idaho. It's been a really warm year and also a fairly dry year. But normally we would have some sort of moisture, and since we don't, we're going to have to supplement that so our plants don't dry out and die. So that's kind of one of those examples of areas where it stays cold and then the moisture is unavailable. The other thing we can think about in our garden is microclimates where areas are going to be a little bit warmer than normal. So along here we have a raised bed, and this raised bed has a lot of stones on it. And during the daytime on clear days, the heat is actually going to build up in those stones, and then it's going to slowly radiate out through the night. So this is actually going to keep some of these areas a little bit warmer. So like these succulents here, which are cold hardy, but they're really tucked in, and that's going to be an excellent location for them, because these stones, where it's in the sunlight, these stones actually feel warm to the touch. In the shadows, it's still cool, but they're going to absorb that heat and radiate them out at night and keep those plants warmer. Now, the other thing to consider in your yard is what are the structures in your yard that might affect the airflow or the pooling of cold air. So I'll give you an idea. My backyard does have a slope to it. So you can see that I've got a higher bench and then it transitions down to a lower bench. So on cold air nights where the air is still, we'll actually have coldness or cold air that's going to start pooling on the ground, and then it's going to flow like a river down the hillside. And when it reaches an obstruction, it's going to build up and form a big pool of cold air, just like a dam would do in a stream. So here I've got a back fence. Okay, so cold air is going to build up under that back fence, and it's going to slip through the slats, and it's going to flow down through my yard until it finds another obstruction. So in my yard, I have another fence that separates my front yard from my backyard. And all along the border of this fence is going to be a location where cool air is going to amass, and it's going to pool up, and it's going to create a colder microclimate there during the nighttime hours, or when the air is still. Now, one of the things that I've done to combat that, because I do love my garden, and I also do live in an area where there's a high wind, is I've actually created my fence so there's air gaps in between. And those air gaps are going to allow that cold air that would normally pool against the fence to actually slip through and continue to head down the hillside. Now, for most people, that doesn't happen. Most people don't have the offset fencing slats, but I did that actually for the cold pooling and also because of the higher wind gusts that we get here. So in North Idaho, where I'm located, Snake River is just right down there. We get gusts routinely up to 40 or 50 miles an hour. And about every 2 weeks, we'll have a good wind event. So I wanted to have my fence have a chance to have a little bit of pressure relief. So because of that, I have offset my slats on my fence. So visually and for the animals, it is well blocked, but if we go at an angle, we can see that there is a lot of airflow. As far as microclimates, there is actually more microclimates than just ones that we have to worry about as far as cold. We can also have microclimates that are going to be warmer, where we can put some plants that may not normally survive in our area in a location where they're going to receive a lot of solar radiation, so a lot of sunlight. And maybe they're backed up against a lighter structure or a structure of stone that can accumulate that heat throughout the day and then radiate it out at night. So this would be an example. So we're seeing these geraniums here, and these geraniums are an area where we've got a wall on one side that's concrete, we've got fencing here, and they are not in the same shape as geraniums that we have in another location. So you can see we have turgor to the leaves, so they are still quite alive. There's a little bit of frost damage on this leaf here, but this one is okay. And then we have some newer growth here. So these are geraniums that are up against the concrete portion of our foundation, blocked by a fence. So this gets fairly warm in the afternoon. And even though we do have airflow here coming through the fence, this is still a warmer microclimate. Now, if we move just a little further across the yard, so about 15 feet or so away, we get into another area, and these are actually the same geraniums, but they are in a different microclimate. So this area that they're in, all of this soil down here, you can see a little bit of the frost on the soil. Let's see if we can get that to focus. Well, you'll have to trust me. So there we go. There's some frost that's still in the soil. So this whole area is frozen because it's blocked by a large fence. So this area stays frozen during the daytime and gets, well, pretty much no sunlight for many months out of the winter. So this stays much, much colder. So this would be a cold microclimate. Whereas we go over here, and this is a warm microclimate. Now, microclimates are more than just hot and cold in the winter. It can be the same thing during the summertime. So one of the things that I've got going on right now is immediately behind me, and it's going to get a little bright, I have sunlight that's actually bouncing off my south exposure windows. And if we look around to the yard, this is actually a bright spot where we have indirect sunlight, and this sunlight is actually coming from that window that's that way, but the sun is that way, so it's a reflection. So those windows right there are providing another microclimate, and that is a microclimate in the summertime of very intense sunlight. So you're getting plants that are having like 1.5 to 2 times as much sunlight as they'd normally get, and that's going to affect their growth and create a microclimate of temperatures that are much, much hotter than normal, and also soil conditions that are much drier than normal. And one of the ways that I see that in my yard is I've got 5 windows behind me, and those 5 windows actually magnify the late afternoon sun. And in my yard in the summertime, I actually have a sweeping arc where that sunlight actually burns my grass and causes it to dry out much, much quicker. So for that reason, I'm trying to do a more drought resistant grass, and I'm making sure that I water it more frequently. So anyway, with your own home, these are things that you have to consider when you're deciding where you're going to put your plants for the year. Are you going to put them in areas that are shadier? Are you going to put them in areas that are warmer? And are we concerned about perennials that need to live over the wintertime? Or are we more concerned about having plants that are tender or more hardy that we're going to plant in the summertime? So we need to kind of keep those into consideration when we are looking at our plants as far as microclimates. Anyway, I hope you're learning something. I'm sure we will cover this a little bit more later on. Ag Teacher Thoughts out.